Joseph resists temptation. Seeing that she could not attain her objective by entreaties or tears, Zuleika finally used force, but decided to wait for favorable circumstances. She did not have long to wait. When the Nile overflowed its banks and, according to the annual custom of the Egyptians, all went to the river, men and women, people and princes, accompanied by music, Zuleika remained at home under pretense of being sick. This was her long-looked-for opportunity, she thought. She got up and ascended to the hall of state and clothed herself seductively. She placed precious stones on her head, onyx stones set in silver and gold. She beautified her face and body with all sorts of things for the purifying of women. She perfumed the hall and the whole house with cassia and frankincense, spread myrrh and aloes all over, and then sat herself down at the entrance to the hall, in the vestibule leading to the house, through which Joseph had to pass to his work. Soon Joseph came in from the field and was on the point of entering the house when he reached the place where Zuleika sat. He saw all that she had done and quickly turned back. His mistress, perceiving it, called out to him, "What's wrong, Joseph? Go to your work. I'll make room for you that you may pass by." Joseph did as she told him, entered the house, took his seat, and set about his master's work. Then Zuleika stood before him suddenly, in all her beauty of person and magnificence of raiment, and repeated the desire of her heart. It was the first and last time that Joseph's steadfastness deserted him, but only for an instant. When he was on the point of complying with the wish of his mistress, the image of his mother Rachel appeared before him, and that of his aunt Leah, and the image of his father, Jacob. Jacob addressed him, "In time to come, the names of your brothers will be engraved on the breastplate of the high priest. Do you desire to have your name appear with theirs, or will you forfeit this honor through sinful conduct? For understand, he that keeps company with harlots loses his strength." This vision of the dead, and especially the image of his father, brought Joseph to his senses, and his illicit passion departed from him. Astonished at the swift change in his countenance, Zuleika said, "My friend and true love, why are you so afraid, that you are near to fainting?" Joseph, "I see my father." Zuleika, "Where is he? Why, there is no one in the house." Joseph, "You belong to a people that are like the ass. It perceives nothing, but I belong to those who can see things." Joseph fled away from the house, the same house in which long before wonders had been done for Sarah, kept captive there by Pharaoh. But hardly was he outside when the sinful passion again overwhelmed him, and he returned to Zuleika's chamber. Then the Lord appeared to him, holding the Eben Shetnia in his hand, and said, "If you touch her, I will cast away this stone on which the earth is founded, and the world will fall to ruin." Sobered again, Joseph started to escape from his mistress, but Zuleika caught him by his garment and said, "As the king lives, if you will not fulfill my wish, you must die." And while she spoke, she drew a sword with her free hand from under her dress, and pressing it against Joseph's throat, she said, "Do as I bid you, or you die." Joseph ran out, leaving a piece of his garment in the hands of Zuleika as he wrenched himself loose from her grasp with a quick, energetic motion. Zuleika's passion for Joseph was so violent that in place of its owner, whom she could not succeed in subduing to her will, she kissed and caressed the fragment of cloth left in her hand. At the same time, she was not slow to perceive the danger into which she had put herself, for she feared Joseph might possibly betray her conduct, and she considered ways and means of obviating the consequences of her folly. Meanwhile, her friends returned from the Nile festival and came to visit her and inquire after her health. They found her looking wretchedly ill on account of the excitement she had passed through, and the anxiety she was in. She confessed to the women what had happened with Joseph, and they advised her to accuse him of immorality before her husband, and then he would be thrown into prison. Zuleika accepted their advice, and she begged her visitors to support her charges by also lodging complaints against Joseph, that he had been annoying them with improper proposals. But Zuleika did not depend entirely on the assistance of her friends. She planned a ruse besides, to be sure of convincing her husband of Joseph's guilt. She put away her rich clothes of state, put on her ordinary clothes, and took to her sickbed, in which she had been lying when the people left to go to the festival. Also, she took Joseph's torn garment and laid it out next to her. Then she sent a little boy to summon some of the men of her house, and to them she told the tale of Joseph's alleged outrage, saying, "The Hebrew slave, whom your master has brought into my house, attempted to do violence to me today. You had scarcely gone away to the festival when he entered the house, and making sure that no one was here, he tried to force me to yield to his lustful desire. But I grasped his clothes, tore them, and cried out with a loud voice. When he heard that, he was seized with fear, and he fled, but he left this garment by me." The men of the house spoke not a word, but, in a rage against Joseph, they went to their master and reported to him what had come to pass. In the meantime, the husbands of Zuleika's friends had also spoken to Potiphar, at the instigation of their wives, and complained of his slave, that he molested them. Potiphar hurried home and found his wife in low spirits, and though the cause of her dejection was chagrin at not having succeeded in winning Joseph's love, she pretended that it was anger at the immoral conduct of the slave. She accused him in the following words: "O husband, may you not live a day longer if you do not punish the wicked slave that desired to defile your bed, who did not keep in mind who he was when he came to our house and demeaned himself with modesty. Nor has he been mindful of the favors he received from you. He planned to abuse me, and at the time of observing a festival, when you would be absent." These words she spoke at the moment of conjugal intimacy with Potiphar, when she was certain of exerting her influence on her husband. Potiphar believed her and had Joseph flogged unmercifully. While the cruel blows fell on him, Joseph cried to God, "O Lord, you know I am innocent of these things, and why should I die today on account of a false accusation by the hands of these uncircumcised, impious men?" God opened the mouth of Zuleika's child, a babe of only 11 months, and he spoke to the men that were beating Joseph, saying, "What is your quarrel with this man? Why do you inflict such evil on him? My mother lies. This is the true tale of what happened." And the child proceeded to tell all that had passed, how Zuleika had tried at first to persuade Joseph to act wickedly, and then had tried to force him to do her will. The people listened in great amazement, but the report finished, the babe spoke no more words, as before. Abashed by the speech of his own infant, Potiphar commanded his bailiffs to leave off from beating Joseph, and the matter was brought into court, where priests sat as judges. Joseph protested his innocence and related all that had happened according to the truth, but Potiphar repeated the account his wife had given him. The judges ordered the garment of Joseph to be brought, which Zuleika had in her possession, and they examined the tear. It turned out to be on the front of the mantle, and they came to the conclusion that Zuleika had tried to hold him fast, and had been foiled in her attempt by Joseph, against whom she was now lodging a trumped-up charge. They decided that Joseph had not incurred the death penalty, but they condemned him to incarceration because he was the cause of a stain on Zuleika's fair name. Potiphar himself was convinced of Joseph's innocence, and when he cast him into prison, he said, "I know that you are not guilty of so vile a crime, but I must put you in prison, lest a taint cling to my children." Joseph in prison. By way of punishment for having told lies about his 10 brothers before his father, Joseph had to languish for 10 years in prison, to which the wiles of other liars had in turn condemned him. But, on the other hand, as he had sanctified the name of God before the world by his chastity and his steadfastness, he was rewarded. The letter H, which occurs twice in the name of God, was added to his name. He had been called Joseph, but now he was also called Jehoshaphat. Though he was bound in prison, Joseph was not yet safe from the machinations of his mistress, whose passion for him was in no way lessened. In truth, it was she that had induced her husband to change his intention regarding Joseph. She urged him to imprison the slave rather than kill him, for she had hoped as a prisoner he could be made amenable to her wishes. She spoke to her husband, saying, "Do not destroy your property. Cast the slave in prison and keep him there. Then sell him and get back the price you paid." Thus she had the opportunity of visiting Joseph in his cell and trying to persuade him to do her will. She would say, "This and that outrage I have executed against you, but as you live, I will put still more outrages on you if you do not obey me." But Joseph replied, "The Lord executes judgment for the oppressed. Zuleika, I will push matters so far that all men will hate you." Joseph, "The Lord loves the righteous." Zuleika, "I will sell you into a strange land." Joseph, "The Lord preserves the stranger." Then she would resort to enticements in order to obtain her desire. She would promise to release him from prison, if he would but grant her wish. But he would say, "Better is it to remain here than with you and commit a trespass against God." These visits to Joseph in prison Zuleika continued for a long time, but when, finally, she saw that all her hopes were in vain, she let him alone. As the mistress persisted in her love for Joseph, so his master, her husband, could not separate himself from his favorite slave. Though a prisoner, Joseph continued to minister to the needs of Potiphar, and he received permission from the keeper of the prison to spend some time in his master's house. In many other ways, the jailer showed himself kindly disposed towards Joseph. Seeing Joseph's zeal and conscientiousness in executing the tasks laid on him, and under the spell of his enchanting beauty, he made prison life as easy as possible for Joseph. He even ordered better food for him than the common prison fare, and he found it superfluous caution to watch over Joseph, for he could see no wrong in him. And he also observed that God was with him, in good days and in bad. He even appointed him to be the overseer of the prison, and as Joseph commanded, so the other prisoners were obliged to do. For a long time, people talked of nothing but the accusation raised against Joseph by his mistress. In order to divert the attention of the public from him, God ordained the 2 high officers, the chief butler and the chief baker, should offend their lord, the king of Egypt, and they were put into the house of the captain of the guard. Now the people ceased their talk about Joseph and spoke only of the scandal at court. The charges laid at the door of the noble prisoners were that they had attempted to do violence to the daughter of Pharaoh, and they conspired to poison the king himself. Besides, they had shown themselves derelict in their service. In the wine the butler handed over to the king to drink, a fly had been discovered, and the bread set on the royal table by the chief baker contained a little pebble. On account of these transgressions, they were condemned to death by Pharaoh. But for the sake of Joseph, it was ordained by divine providence that the king should first detain them in prison before he ordered their execution. The Lord had enkindled the wrath of the king against his servants only that the wish of Joseph for liberty might be fulfilled, for they were the instruments of his deliverance from prison. And though they were doomed to death, yet in consideration of the exalted office they had held at court, the keeper of the prison accorded them privileges, as, for instance, a man was assigned to wait on them. and the one appointed to do so was Joseph. The chief butler and chief baker had been confined in prison for 10 years when they dreamed a dream, both of them. But as for the interpretation, each dreamed only that of the other one's dream. In the morning, when Joseph brought them water for their washing, he found them sad and depressed in spirits, and in the manner of the sages, he asked them why they looked different on that day from the others. They said to him, "We have dreamed a dream, and our two dreams resemble each other in certain particulars, but there is no one that can interpret them." Joseph said to them, "God grants understanding to man to interpret dreams. Tell them to me, I pray you." It was a reward for attributing greatness and credit to the Lord, to whom it belongs, that Joseph later attained his lofty position. The chief butler proceeded to tell his dream. "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, and its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup to Pharaoh." The chief butler was not aware that his dream contained a prophecy regarding the future of Israel, but Joseph discerned the present meaning. And he interpreted the larger dream to himself, saying, "The 3 branches are the 3 fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose descendants in Egypt will be redeemed by 3 leaders, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And the cup given into the hand of Pharaoh is the cup of wrath which he will have to drink in the end." This interpretation of the dream Joseph kept for himself, and he told the butler nothing of it. But out of gratitude for the glad tidings of the deliverance of Israel from the bondage of Egypt, he gave him a favorable interpretation of the dream, that he would live and be restored. Joseph also begged him to remember him and deliver him from the dungeon. When the chief baker heard the interpretation of the butler's dream, he knew that Joseph had divined its meaning correctly, for in his own dream he had seen the interpretation of his friend's dream, and he proceeded to tell Joseph what he had dreamed. "I also was in my dream, and, behold, 3 baskets of white bread were on my head, and in the uppermost basket there was all manner of meats for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head." This dream also conveyed a prophecy regarding the future of Israel. The 3 baskets are the kingdoms to which Israel will be made slaves, Babylon, Media, and Greece, and the uppermost basket indicates the wicked rule of Rome, which will extend over all the nations of the world until the Messiah shall come and annihilate Rome. Again, Joseph kept the prophecy a secret. To the chief baker he gave only the interpretation that had reference to him, but it was unfavorable. He would be executed because through his dream Joseph was made acquainted with the suffering Israel would have to undergo. All this came to pass on the 3rd day, the day on which he explained the meaning of his dreams to the 2 distinguished prisoners. A son was born to Pharaoh, and to celebrate the joyous event, the king arranged a feast for his princes and servants that was to last 8 days. He invited them and all the people to his table, and he entertained them with royal splendor. The feast had its beginning on the 3rd day after the birth of the child, and on that occasion the chief butler was restored to his position, and the chief baker was hanged, for Pharaoh's counselors had discovered that it was not the butler's fault that the fly had dropped into the king's wine, but the baker had been guilty of carelessness in allowing the pebble to get into the bread. Likewise, it appeared that the butler had no part in the conspiracy to poison the king, while the baker was revealed as one of the plotters, and he had to pay with his life. Pharaoh's dreams. Properly speaking, Joseph should have gone free from his dungeon on the same day as the butler. He had been there 10 years by that time, and had made amends for the slander he had uttered against his 10 brothers. However, he remained in prison 2 years longer. Blessed is the man that trusts in the Lord, whose hope is the Lord. But Joseph had put his confidence in flesh and blood. He had begged the chief butler to remember him when the butler was back in good graces with Pharaoh. But the butler forgot his promise, and therefore Joseph had to stay in prison 2 years more than originally allotted to him. The butler had not forgotten him intentionally, but it was ordained by God that his memory should fail him. He would say to himself, "If thus and so happens, I will remember and tell Pharaoh about Joseph." But the conditions imagined were sure to be reversed, or if he made a knot in his cords as a reminder, an angel came and undid the knot. Thus Joseph did not enter his mind. But the Lord sets an end to darkness, and Joseph's liberation was not delayed by a single moment beyond the time decreed for it. God said, "You, O butler, forgot Joseph, but I did not." And he caused Pharaoh to dream a dream that was the occasion for Joseph's release. In his dream, Pharaoh saw 7 cows, well favored and fat, come up out of the Nile, and they all grazed peacefully on the bank of the river. In years when the harvest is abundant, friendship, love, and brotherly harmony reign among men, and these 7 fat cows stood for 7 such prosperous years. After the fat cows, 7 more came up out of the river, ill-favored and thin, and each had her back turned to the others, for when distress prevails, each man turns away from the other. The 7 lean cows then ate the 7 fat cows. For a brief space, Pharaoh awoke, and when he went back to sleep again, he dreamed a second dream, about 7 fat and good ears of corn, and 7 ears that were thin and withered from the east wind, the withered ears swallowing the full ears. He awoke, and it was morning, and dreams dreamed in the morning are the ones that come true. It was not the first time that Pharaoh had had these dreams. They had visited him every night during a period of 2 years, and he had always forgotten them in the morning. This was the time he remembered them, for the day had arrived for Joseph to come forth from his prison house. Pharaoh's heart beat violently when he recalled his dreams. Especially the second one, about the ears of corn, disquieted him. He reflected that whatever has a mouth can eat, and therefore the dream of the 7 lean cows that ate up the 7 fat cows did not appear strange. But the ears of corn that swallowed up the other ears of corn troubled his spirit. He therefore called all the wise men in the land, and they endeavored in vain to find a satisfactory interpretation. They explained that the 7 fat cows meant 7 daughters to be born to Pharaoh, and 7 lean cows meant that he would bury 7 daughters. The good ears of corn meant that Pharaoh would conquer 7 countries, and the thin ears that 7 provinces would rebel against him. About the ears of corn they did not all agree. Some thought the good ears stood for 7 cities to be built by Pharaoh, and the 7 withered ears indicated that these same cities would be destroyed at the end of his reign. Wise as he was, Pharaoh knew that none of these explanations hit the nail on the head. So he issued a decree summoning all interpreters of dreams to appear before him on pain of death, and he held out great rewards and distinctions to the one who should succeed in finding the true meaning of his dreams. In obedience to his summons, all the wise men appeared. The magicians and sacred scribes that were in Mizraim, the city of Egypt, as well as those from Goshen, Ramses, Zoan, and the whole country of Egypt. And with them came princes, officers, and servants of the king from all the cities of the land. To all these the king narrated his dreams, but none could interpret them to his satisfaction. Some said that the 7 fat cows were the 7 legitimate kings that would rule over Egypt, and the 7 lean cows betokened 7 princes that would rise up against these 7 kings and exterminate them. The 7 good ears of corn were the 7 superior princes of Egypt who would engage in a war for their overlord, and would be defeated by as many insignificant princes, who were betokened by the 7 thin ears. Another interpretation was that the 7 fat cows were the 7 fortified cities of Egypt, which would at some future time fall into the hands of 7 Canaanite nations, who were foreshadowed in the 7 lean cows. According to this interpretation, the second dream supplemented the first. It meant that the descendants of Pharaoh would regain sovereignty over Egypt at a subsequent period and would subdue the 7 Canaanite nations as well. And there was a third interpretation given by some. The 7 fat cows are 7 women whom Pharaoh would marry, but they would die during his lifetime, their loss being indicated by the 7 lean cows. Furthermore, Pharaoh would have 14 sons, and the 7 strong ones would be conquered by the 7 weaklings. And a fourth, you will have 7 sons, O Pharaoh, these are the 7 fat cows. But these sons of yours will be killed by 7 powerful rebellious princes. But then 7 minor princes will come, and they will kill the 7 rebels. Avenge your descendants, and restore the dominion to your family. The king was as little pleased with these interpretations as with the others, and in his wrath he ordered the wise men, the magicians, and the scribes of Egypt to be killed. And the hangman readied himself to execute the royal decree. Then Myrod, Pharaoh's chief butler, became frightened, seeing that the king was so vexed at his failure to secure an interpretation of his dreams that he was on the point of giving up the ghost. He was alarmed about the king's death, for it was doubtful whether the successor to the throne would retain him in office. He resolved, therefore, to do all in his power to keep Pharaoh alive. He stepped before him and spoke, I now remember 2 faults of mine. I showed myself ungrateful to Joseph, in that I did not bring his request before you, and also I saw you in distress by reason of your dream, without letting you know that Joseph can interpret dreams. When you were angry with me, I was put in the prison house of the captain of the guard, me and the chief baker. And with us there was a simple young man, one of the despised race of the Hebrews, slave to the captain of the guard, and he interpreted our dreams to us. And it came to pass that he interpreted correctly. Therefore, O king, stop the hand of the hangman. Let them not execute the Egyptians. The slave I speak of is still in the dungeon, and if the king will consent to summon him, he will surely interpret your dreams. Next, Joseph before Pharaoh. End part 27 of 95, TheLegendsOfTheJews.com.